We were at the depersonalizing versus repersonalizing. That's where we stopped.
Yeah. Okay, so situations are always developing, they're never stationary. Of course, I think we've discussed this quite a bit. I love how she says on page 65, by the way. Here's something else I want to talk about. Okay, she talks about obedience and liberty, right?
Yeah.
I have spoken of several dilemmas. How to take orders and yet not be under, quote unquote, how to take orders and yet keep one's pride in one's work. How to take orders and yet have a share of responsibility. There is still another dilemma troubling many people, which our present point of view helps to solve. Namely, whether you can have obedience and liberty. Interesting, right? You see the political science background here. That group of political scientists and guild socialists who are denying the power of the state say that you cannot have obedience and liberty. I think they're wholly wrong, but I think we should ask ourselves to what we owe obedience. Surely only to a functional unity of that which we are a part, a functional unity, i.e. an actual entity, to which we are contributing. I agree with the guild socialists that the state is not that now. Those who are concerned with reorganization of industry should take a warning from the failure of the state. Okay. What is she saying? I'm on page 64. What's the point? Let's skip down a little bit for a little clarification. She goes a little story. So okay. We have considered the subject of symbols, i.e. eternal objects. It is often very apparent that an order is a symbol. Okay, so we try to get to that one thing that's abstract, pure, and good. The referee in the game stands watch in hand and says, go. It is an order, but order only as symbol. I may say to an employee, do so-and-so, but I should say it only because we have both agreed, openly or tacitly. So we agreed expressly or we implied agreement, that which I am ordering done is the best thing to be done. The order is then a symbol. It's not an order itself. And if it is a philosophical and psychological truth that we owe obedience only to a functional unity to which we're contributing, we should remember that a more accurate way of stating that would be to say that our obligation is to a unifying, to a process. Does that clarify it a little bit more?
It's like telling an employee what to do, but it's not so much in order. It's like you guys are in agreement. Like when I was ordering medical records, the girl would say, okay, I need these records, and she would say, I need these records. I'd be like, okay, so I'd go get them. It's not so much in order, but we both agree that, yeah, that they're needed in order for us to close the file.
That's right. I mean, you ever been...
Indirect order, kind of?
The order isn't... Yeah, Mike?
Oh, no, I was going to say the same thing. Like, it's like the actual situation. If someone's giving you orders, kind of like role-playing. Like, you have to play these different roles. Someone usually has to delegate to ensure that everything is done on time. But then it's nothing personal.
Yeah, the situation has already dictated certain things be done. So when I say go do this, I mean, we've already agreed on everything, now we're just kind of starting it.
So you expect it in a way, because it's part of your job.
Yeah.
Depending on what it is.
You're just waiting
if
for...
If I get an email, it's not because she's taking work off of her desk, because that's something I do, so, okay, I'll do it. But I don't take it as an order, it just because it needs to get done.
Yeah. You're all like cogs in a wheel, cogs in a, gear cogs in a factory thing, right? It's just, we've agreed on how to build it, now we're just kind of executing it. Does that make sense? Or have you ever been around and you say, hey, I know we all need the help, what can I do? You say, yeah, do this, this, and this. Right? What can I do? But I've asked the question, what can I do to contribute to that situation? The order is just as simple at that point. Right? Does that make sense? It's a wild way of thinking about it, isn't it? Any questions? Does that help? Okay, so...
What part of that was on your slide? That one? Oh, was that the last one? Situations?
Yeah. So situations are always changing. Let's talk a little more about this then, right? Last thing on page 65. This brings us now to one of the most serious problems in this matter of orders. It is important, but we can touch on it only briefly. It is what we spoke of in the foregoing paper as the evolving situation. I am trying here to show that the order must be integral to the situation and must be recognized as such. So when you give an order, it's because the situation demands it, not because you're just giving orders and bossism. But we have the situation, but we saw that the situation was always developing. If the situation is never stationary, then the order should never be stationary, so to speak. How to prevent it from being so is our problem. The situation is changing while orders are being carried out because by and through orders are being carried out. How is the order to keep up with the situation? External orders never can. Only those drawn fresh from the situation. Moreover, if taking a responsible attitude towards experience involves recognizing the evolving situation, a conscientious attitude towards experience means that we note the change which the developing situation makes in ourselves. The situation does not change without us. And then she summarizes it. Integration being the basic laws of life, orders should be the composite conclusion of those who give and those who receive them. So what does that mean exactly?
So does it go back to the circular order or circular reasoning or something? Like there has to be like a back and forth. It can't just be like do this.
Yeah, so it's kind of do this, and then I kind of say, hey, something is changing, okay, then let's fix it this way. And you know, when you trust your employees to be responsible and conscientious, you know, when you say go do this, you can trust them with a certain degree of discretion, right? That they can understand the changing or the evolving situation, right?
Is she also saying like the situation actually changes from your behavior to the situation?
Absolutely.
It's kind of confusing.
Yes, that's absolutely what
It's
she's
like how you approach the situation changes the situation.
And
That's
then you
exactly it.
reevaluate each
Yes,
time.
and a new order needs to be delivered, 100%. Again, if you want to tie it back into Whitehead, okay? Whitehead envisions an actual entity or an organization or interaction between people. It's like a bubble. Okay, it forms the situation, we see it, and then it bursts, right? But then it can reform. It can reform an infinite number of times, as a matter of fact. But every time it reforms, it's a little different. And so the story or the concreting or the integrating must be different also each time. So just like I could give this same lecture to you guys 1,000,000 times, and it'd be a little different every time because our discussions would be different. Does this make sense? So the orders are always changing, flowing, and moving. And I like how you guys put it. The people are changing, they're changing the situation, you've got to update those.
Well, when sales are not doing good or people not making money, they have to change the structure of the company.
That's right. Yeah. So Mary Parker Farr, when she's talking about it, she's looking at more almost like a team level. But if you want to abstract it to Whitehead for more of a strategic level, he would absolutely agree with you. Absolutely.
One's a team effort kind of ways, and the other one's restructuring the company.
Yeah. But of course, if you believe Whitehead and Follett, wholeheartedly, they might make the argument that rules of a team can also apply to rules of an organization because an organization is just a very large team. The rules change a little bit, but it should be more or less pretty close. Yeah. Is this making sense? Does it make a little more sense when we go through in class?
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so we just went through that. Let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. Every time I go through this book, I always forget how much I love it until I reread it and represent it again. So, this total person, okay, I'm looking at speech number 3, business as an integrative unity. Okay, so here's the passage I'm looking for. A man said to me once, a man working on a salary as the head of a department in a factory, I'm no wage earner, working so many hours a day. If I wake up at midnight and have an idea that might benefit the factory, it belongs to the factory. His implication was that the wage earner could not feel this. Can business reach its maximum efficiency and service unless it is so organized that the wage earner does feel this? Remember I talked about Chester Barnard and the total person? And I gave the example of the woman by the mother who wouldn't paint lead toys. So the idea is that business, in many ways, should be considered an extension of the person, and the person is an extension of the business. So what she's saying, all right, that particular guy was great, because when he had the idea, he and his work were inseparable, right? What she would like to say is, can we get wage earners to feel the same way? And the whole point of the speech is a lot about how to get factory workers, wage earners, to feel like they have ownership in their work, to feel like they have ownership in the organization, in the business, so that when they also have an idea in the middle of the night and they're not being paid, they still do it, so that work and play can go hand in hand quite naturally. Yeah.
So like applying that to the modern workplace, could that be like culture of a workplace? Maybe like benefits? I don't know. How does that like tie in?
If you make work and play simultaneous, I can think of one place in particular that I've never worked there myself, but supposedly has this culture is Google.
Like Google and Facebook.
Yeah, so you got these people running around scooters, and they make it comfortable so that it's almost like a playful atmosphere.
They have really good food.
They have really good food, and then they do social stuff together,
It comes
and
out
all that
of
stuff.
It comes out of like
Riot
picture
Games.
posts, but
Yeah.
It's
Gaming
like a
company.
Oh, what about them? I don't know about this. Tell me more.
So,
would you say Riot?
Riot Games.
Oh, yeah,
They make
Riot
League,
Games,
League of Legends.
yeah, League of
They
Legends.
make one game.
it's a really big game.
So I did the construction on the campus they moved into. It's 12 acres. It's 280,000 square feet. They have a cafeteria that's like a
pretty
food
good.
court
Yeah.
would be. It's that huge.
It's like catered. Like,
But it's just amazing. The landscaping, they spent $7 million on the landscaping to make it look like the background in the game.
where's it located? The campus.
It's over in West LA.
No, it's West LA.
West LA.
Yeah,
What
it's
is
in
what is
West
it
LA.
called?
It's Riot
Riot
Games.
And what's the game they make?
League of Legends.
League of Legends.
But they're a gaming company.
But
In
they only
general.
make one game.
Really? I thought they
And
only
so
made
when
like
you say to
computer
them,
games.
you only make one game, they say, well, football's a
Only one
game.
game, yeah.
That's right.
Nah.
It's a very competitive game. Like,
It is.
There's a lot of money in it too.
You can go to college for the gaming skills.
Yeah.
They have teams of 4 that play against each other, and they sell out like the Staples Center, like you would for like a hockey game. And these are people going to watch 4 guys or girls play against
They
another
just had
4.
that a little while ago.
Yeah,
a couple
it's
months ago.
huge. But their whole point of view about the campus is that give them everything they need so they don't want to leave. They have
Exactly.
nap rooms. They'll do your laundry. It was, I was.
There's some that even have showers. Because the ad agencies run like that too. My husband's been to one where they have showers.
Yeah.
Because they spend sometimes the nights there.
But everything was about, they give them a free lunch,
Yeah.
free dinner. It's all completely thought out that they would just not really need to go home that often.
Some of them have chefs in the kitchen
Yeah.
to make like even special gourmets and stuff like that.
It's really competitive to get in. To
Yeah,
get hired by
I
them.
tried to apply, but I
Oh,
got a
really?
response that said, unfortunately, your qualifications don't match what we need. I was
So
like,
they
"Damn
have,
it."
one whole part of the one building is you can get invited onto the campus and they'll teach you how to play the game.
Wow, that's so cool.
It doesn't cost you anything.
I think I want to go for the hell of it.
Yeah, no, it was, because I was completely behind the scenes because we were building all of this and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
But that's not the only organization, right? There's another very large organization that runs the same way. The Army, the military does this too, right? They want to make sure that you don't have reasons to leave base or go very far from base.
Yeah, that's true. I was married to somebody in the Air Force and we were in Germany. They had their own department store, their own
Yeah.
gas station, their
San
own
Diego
liquor
has that.
store.
My
Yeah.
first duty station was an Air Force base, and it is the life. The Air Force takes good living to the extreme, though.
I
And they
worked-
really have a good life.
I worked in the NCO club.
Oh yeah.
So they had a a nightclub. It had a restaurant. You could even buy cases of beer, and it was just all inclusive. Yeah, you didn't have to leave.
When I was in Korea, there were people who didn't leave base. They just stayed on base because it did have everything you need: weight rooms, fun, whatever. And it's great because if there's a war, they can call you, and you're not that far away. They have a base somewhere, probably, right? But I mean, again, the idea is you don't separate the work from the personal, right? Academics are like this too, professors. I mean, we don't have a life at all. I mean, we stay up day and night prepping and researching. It's a joke.
Would this by any chance have any part with like that show that's called Undercover Boss? They see like the workers that do very well, and then they give them prizes at the end. They either give them a better salary, or they give them a better title, and they even like pay for their mortgage, or they give them money.
Giving it some sort of a family feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's weird.
It's a strange
we
setup,
had that, and last semester we each had to pick an episode, and it's very strange how that works. It's not always for the same reasons.
Like, how do they know who to pick? And every time they pick, it's always somebody that is doing something good.
Oh no, the one I did
There were some.
was the company was going out of business, and they knew, and they made all these promises.
Some of them they make the back.
But see, like when we were working on our project, we came across, I don't remember exactly which one we did, but it was, you don't get to find out if they actually received that. Like there was one where he was a cook and he was really good at that. He loved cooking and he had a passion for it and he was really good at it. And he was I think he was working the drive-thru. And at the end of the show, he was supposed to get introduced to the culinary team of the whole chain, the fast food chain, whatever. And we don't know if that even happened, or maybe it was just an introduction, like, okay, you meet him, now get the hell out of here. So we don't know if it was like that, or if we're just like, okay, I'm gonna give you a job offer here.
Which is always the problem with shows like that.
You don't
Because
know.
of the language they manipulate, and they get away with it too. So it looks like you're actually doing something for them, but you don't know if it's actually gonna happen for you.
I mean, I see what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it seem like a family business. And family-run enterprises are also like this. Like the work, play, and social don't actually divide up. And this is what Follett is getting at, right? For restoring that family feeling. Now, you have to remember the context. Progressive era, this is actually not too surprising.
Right.
Let's see. Shifting. Well, I love some of this shift from individual to business integration. So she talks about how you can simply have stuff at one level of analysis to it. Let's skip over this one, and let's talk a little bit about conferring versus fighting. Page 73. It's weird, there's some blank pages, but yeah.
Wait, you say 73, you mean this part right here, right?
It's above
Conferring versus
73.
fighting.
It's above the number.
Capital and labor must fight or unite. Think of the historical context. Workers and factory owners must get together, hopefully. Now she has an interesting idea. We want to do away with the fight attitude to get rid of sides, yet there's no sense in which sides are necessary to the richness of that unity, which we are here considering, essential even to its existence in a real sense. Okay? Not merely what is good for the department, but for what is good for the business as viewed from his department. What are they talking about?
So get rid of putting blame on people. So if you're in a certain department, you're not always blaming your shortcomings on that department.
That's right. And so there's kind of a little bit of foreshadowing here, right? Remember we talked about this in strategy, right? So you understand what the strategy is. That's your truth or law of the situation. And we don't do the turf war thing. Right? You find a way to get along with people irrespective of the department, irrespective of the function. You contribute to the total organization in your own respective way, as opposed to stay out of my business, this is my turf, this is my domain, this is my budget. Does that make sense? That's what she's getting at. Skip over this just price and wages, which is basically talking about here is more or less looking at encouraging us to pay wages that actually match the cost of a worker's cost of living. And she talks about this a couple of times. I love, for example, they talk about the minimum wage boards. I'm looking at page 75. My own experience is that nothing gets rid of science, moreover, when we're looking at the actual situation, we're more likely to follow the process necessary to integration, the breaking up of the whole situation into its component parts and considering these separately. My own experience is that nothing gets rid of science so quickly as this process. When minimum wage boards vote on a cost of living budget as a whole, employees and employers are lined up on different sides. When they take up the items one by one, I've invariably seen both employers and employees on each side in the vote. This is because each one is looking at the facts, at what food, for instance, does actually cost in the year 1924. He is not thinking what his side would like to pay the girl. So when they're talking about how much they pay female workers, how much do they actually need to live? Not versus what you want to pay or not want to pay. Okay. Does that make sense? And you also saw an interesting example of breaking up the parts to facilitate integration. Am I losing anybody? Am I going too fast, by the way?
No.
Let's see. Of course, she also talks about interpenetrating responsibility. My goodness. What does that even mean? Interpenetrating responsibility.
Is it 75?
So
Is it 75?
It's
well, depending, I guess, on how you count the pages.
no, it's
Yeah.
like responsibility by more than one
Yeah,
person or group or.
exactly. So again, what she's doing, you've hit the nail on the head, Tammy. It's not so much individual responsibility. It's not so much as two people's responsibility. It's the fact that we all have a responsibility to the whole, to the integrated unity. So what I want you guys to think about for just a second, the more you get into this book, the more you need to think about how Mary Parker Follett sees people and their relationships to an organization. You notice that we're getting more and more away from individuals and teams and more towards group. And again, in this anti-dualist thinking, she's actually advocating for getting rid of levels of analysis. Are you starting to see that? You guys understand what I mean by a level of analysis? So different rules at the bottom of the organization, the middle of the organization, the top of the organization. That's a level of analysis. Looking at the city of LA, the state of California, the entire United States, levels of analysis. So she's actually advocating getting rid of levels of analysis and looking at just constituent parts of an entire whole. Does that make sense? Now she borrows that from Whitehead. Whitehead also wrote an article in 1933 for Harvard Business Review that described this very same thing.
Is that actually in here, interpreting responsibility, or you sum that
No.
up to whatever's in the
It
paragraph?
is, it is,
Yeah.
but I found it on the next page.
76?
No, it's actually,
Oh, did I get the wrong one?
no.
No, it's,
no,
I guess
but
it's
she
78.
refers back to it again
Yeah.
in 78.
Oh, it's 78.
78. The joint responsibility of management labor is one of interpenetrating responsibility and is utterly different from responsibility divided off into sections, management having some and labor some. Mr. Tawney advocated strenuously the maintenance of professional standards by crafts. This is excellent advice, yet we should remember that management too has something to do with the maintenance of professional standards among workmen. Indeed, the responsibility of unions is perhaps something of an anachronism today, even more so today, since the place of crafts in modern industry is so very different from what it was in the early days of trade unionism. So we each have a part to play. Does that make sense? I kind of added the Whitehead part to it. She doesn't say it. Did you see what I was looking for?
And if you put over there that it's 75, it just talks about it, but it doesn't reference it.
Doesn't use the term.
Yeah, it doesn't use the term. It was,
Okay,
that was
that's
my
what I was wondering.
kind of addition.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Just want to make sure.
No, that's a good clarification.
Okay.
Ah. Shirking and dividing responsibility. Frederick Taylor calls this soldiering, as you're going to learn in scientific management. I love this. Employers sometimes speak of dividing responsibility when they are merely shirking responsibility. Many people will avoid a decision in order to be Many people avoid a decision in order to avoid being held responsible for the consequences. Now, I love this anecdote that she gives. I know of a case of a husband and a wife. That's always a bad start to a story, right? Where the husband is autocratic and likes to make the decisions, but when he thinks a particular decision may go wrong, he leaves the decision to his wife. When therefore I hear that workers are going to be given more responsibility, I do not rejoice over that fact at once. I wait to look into the matter and see what it means. A responsibility spread out thin may save your face when things go wrong, but will not correct the wrong. Responsibility will never take the place of technique. Let us make no mistake about that. Does that make sense? So, yeah, don't delegate something to get out of responsibility. Delegate it for, many reasons, but not that one.
And that they can handle the responsibility.
Yeah, make sure they can actually do it. That make sense? Let's skip to our next slide. Yeah, I love this. I love these little stories that she gives. She knows of this husband and wife, and yet that speaks to many people, right?
They work as good examples.
Yeah, they do, don't they? I mean, really, she has basically condensed Plato and Whitehead, and if you actually read Whitehead, it's almost impossible for the casual reader to understand. I mean, he's brilliant, but the way he speaks, it's like, oh my God. So she's condensed all that into basically a conversation you have over a cup of coffee, basically. I mean, this is the brilliance of Follett. So joint responsibility and joint responsibility and joint management. One thing that I like that she says, it kind of sums it up. No amount of supervision can compensate for the absence of discretion.
Where are you?
Oh, 85 right here. So that's the first thing I want to point out, 85. What's that? Above the page, 85 number.
Above 84.
Oh.
Right?
84 or 85?
Above 84, because 85 is on the right side.
Yeah, I know the pages are different.
Okay, where did you show me?
Let's see. Right there.
Oh, no amount.
Yeah. That's one sentence I want to.
No amount of supervision.
One other thing that I want to talk about. Joint loyalty, then, joint responsibility, are different conceptions. I'm looking at 83 and shifting down to 84. Are different conceptions when considered as an interweaving of obligations and when considered as reciprocity of obligations. I wish you to make a note of this fallacy whenever you find it in your reading of your observation of business administration. For instance, Mr. Lyerson asks, does your company desire to do justice as the company sees it, or is the employer ready to administer justice to his employees as they understand justice? But why would Mr. Lyerson think the latter any better than the former? It seems to me that it is just as true in regard to the standards of the conduct of business as is for control, responsibility, loyalty, and standards too must be jointly developed. What's she talking about? What is that? Let's build on that a little bit too, right? Moving to 86. It's recognized that everyone has some managing ability, even if it be very little, and the opportunity should be given to each man to exercise what he has on his actual job. The job of every workman were analyzed so that each could understand what opportunities he had for managing. That might have both a direct and indirect influence on production.
So like every employee has a different set of skills?
Yes, and so we need to recognize that, and management is a joint responsibility, right? So when we talk about justice and loyalty and everything from our employees, as managers, we should be giving that in return. So it's not so much of us managing them, but they should also in some ways be managing us in some way, right? They can manage certain things and we can trust little by little, but that's also our responsibility to make sure that they can manage successfully. Yeah.
So maybe it's like the managers need to let the workers know what needs to be done, but it's up to them to go about doing that. So like the managers aren't gonna say like, okay, take this piece of paper and then write everything down.
Right.
But they can choose like what to do to accomplish a task.
Yeah, it goes back to that field of desire, right? So far, so good. So we start shifting on, and she starts talking a little bit about interdependence of functions. The direct dependence of the worker on management is obvious. She goes, it seems only fair that workmen should not be held responsible for what managers have a large share in through defective planning and the technique of industry. It is obvious now, I think, that joint action is necessary in the development of industry technique. Division between those who manage and those who are managed has been in part artificial. So what is she saying? Does that make sense? So yes, as a manager you have to manage employees, but you're also partially responsible for the results. And understanding, she's hinting at Taylor, Frederick Taylor. You jointly discover the situation together, the employer and the employee, right? You jointly discover planning, training, and all these things kind of together. That's what she's hinting at.
So basically, if something goes wrong, it shouldn't be blamed on the salesperson. It should be because of joint planning. Something happened wrong over there, so you should blame that instead of the one person.
100%. They go hand in hand, right? It's not the employer's fault, it's not the employee's fault, it's some combination of the two. But of course, we're not supposed to be placing blame, right? Because that's Follett's main thing. But in some way, if something didn't go right, it's a joint responsibility. Excellent. Let's see. So as far as worker education, I'll just kind of glance over this. I mean, she basically says it doesn't hurt to educate workers on general business things. That way they can understand the field of desires better and better understand how they're contributing to an overall mission. Now 91 and 92. It's an interesting idea, right? The administrator as an integrator of all interests of all parties concerned. I love this. So far, we have been looking only at the unifying of a single plant and its many relations. We have left out of consideration the question of unifying a whole industry. So now we're actually leaving the plant. Although obviously that is very important. Many short line railroads cannot pay if considered separately. And a number of industries, profit as a whole, could make a reasonable return on that industry as a whole. If the industry were considered as a whole, the so-called marginal plants might be kept going. Again, wages cannot be set by the plant. The tendency is towards equalization in the same trade over considerable areas. This applies also to hours of work. Moreover, if the whole industry, which should take into consideration the demand for its product, one plant cannot, to its greatest advantage, organize its production in relation to demand. This is part of the problem of unemployment. Selling agencies throughout an industry should have some connection if production is to be regularized. What's she talking about?
It's the same concept for a whole industry, that the industries could be helping each other.
That's right. They could be helping each other for one, so stakeholders would be seen as cooperators, collaborators, as opposed to competitors. And furthermore, we start to see how things all kind of look the same across industries. So that's the isomorphism that's kind of making it go a little bit more. I mean, what an interesting idea, though. And yet it seems kind of counter, but we do see it in certain things. Think of airlines. Rival airlines compete with each other to make sure the passengers get from point A. You got Star Alliance and all these kind of things, right? That's a good example of this, right? Certain firms can't get enough capital together by themselves, but they can launch a joint venture. That's exactly what she's talking about, except she wants to do it for the whole industry, that everybody cooperates together instead of looking at pure, straight-up competition. What is best for everybody? Yeah, Mike?
And then does she also touch upon like you have to consider like the consumers also, like workers, consumers, investors. or something.
Everybody in the whole industry has to benefit. That's right. Yeah, very good. Is it making sense? So let's do another 15 minutes or so. Let's see. Okay, I just talked about integration of stakeholders and classes. And another idea that she talks about that I think is important. She looks at, you guys understand when she says business and industrial organization is, I believe, on the verge of making very large contributions to something far more important than democracy. Democracy in its more superficial meaning is the development of integrative unity. Business cannot serve, I'm looking at page 94, its maximum degree of usefulness to the community, cannot perform the service which it has strictly bound itself to perform unless it seeks an enlarged understanding of the practical methods of unifying business organization. What's she saying?
Without unification, you won't get to the goal that you desire.
Furthermore, she's hinting at something that we're going to talk a little bit more about in this book. Mary Parker Follett's actually anti-democracy. I don't know if any of you guys caught that later on in the book. She's anti-democracy because just because a majority of people vote in some way, then some people necessarily have their desires suppressed. And so she's hinting at something that's very important, which just kind of flies in the face of the progressive right thinkers. If, as businesses, we can practice integration, then we can also be a force for greater societal change, greater societal good. Business can serve as an example that political and societal organizations can follow. That's what she's hinting at. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think that makes sense in theory, but then some of her basis is that people have to be intelligent. Like they have to have, like,
Wow.
Yes.
I'm just saying it's
Yeah, it's
like,
true.
it could, I don't think it can be completely practical, but then in a sense it's like ideal, you know, to have everyone work together towards a unifying cause.
I mean, it's an interesting. So remember, not even the people that are unintelligent, they may not be
Yeah.
the ones that are integrators,
Mhm.
but they can be the ones that can be convinced to integrate. So it's not so bad, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to do the job that they're skilled
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. I mean, you empower them in ways that make sense for them.
Because that still will empower them, and then they'll get a good feeling as well.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and kind of has that weird sort of Soviet tint to it too. So you can kind of see why McCarthy wasn't too thrilled with her ideas a couple years later. But yeah, it gives you something to think about. Business can be a force for positive change in society. Let's see. Oops. Here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to go through this reasonably easy and then review your assignment at the end. We'll call it a day. Power! Ooh! Right, folks? So what is power?
Making others do what you want.
Yeah, that's one definition, right?
Yeah, she talks about it a lot.
Make
Yeah.
things happen.
Yeah, making things happen. What else does she say?
Initiating change.
Tammy, you're smiling. What-
Whether it's good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how she talks about oath, permanency, power. But of the greatest of these, I felt, was power. Power or control is a word which we find on almost every page of English labor literature and frequently enough in our own. One of the leaders of the Sheffield Shop Stewards movement said, "We organize for power, the baldest and most succinct statement I have seen." Does not every businessman find one of his most pressing problems to be how to integrate bargaining and scientific methods? As far as I have seen, scientific methods cannot perhaps set exact values. Anti-Taylorism, which you're going to read about later. At the present, they merely set the limits of the bargaining process. Again, it goes on. Okay. Now, then she starts talking about something else. Okay? Control. So we talked about power on page 99. Power might be defined as simply the ability to make things happen, as you correctly talked about. To be a casual agent, to initiate change. Okay. Then she says, we've got this urge to power. His urge, a boy throwing stones at a bird gives us an example of this very elementary kind of power. His urge is to make the bird do something, to fly away. A fuller kind of satisfaction we might note is that of the violinist. It has always seemed to me that the violinist must get one of the greatest satisfactions of being alive. All of him is enlisted. He surely feels power. Probably the leader of an orchestra feels more. And this comes nearer to the kind of power the head of a business feels. Ooh, gives you chills, right?
Yeah, I'm cold in here.
Yeah, that might be it too, right? Now, control might be defined as power exercised as means towards a specific end. Authority as vested control. Does that make sense to you guys? That difference out? Okay. Now, I love this one. All we know that the invalid in the household has, and sometimes exercises quite ruthlessly, power over well and strong members of the family. So the lack of power is also a form of power, right? Now that's a key concept in Christianity, though, right? Was that not Jesus' greatest asset? The fact that he was, he didn't crush the Roman army by, raising his hand and having lightning come down. His power was the fact that he had no power. That'll keep you laying awake at night, right? Really? Okay. Okay, so I like this other idea, right? Power with versus power over. I mean, this is something extremely important, right? I'm looking at page 101. We've been considering what we must watch if we wish to study the question of power. Let's see if we can get a little nearer to this question. So far, my observation has gone. It seems to me, whereas power usually means power over, the power of some person or group over some other person or group, it's possible to develop the conception of power with, or jointly develop power. Coactive, not coercive power. And she gives it a great example. If anyone thinks this distinction between power over and power with is fanciful or personal distinction, I am pleased to be able to say that these two prepositions are used to mark a distinction in law. You have rights over a slave. You have rights with a servant. What does that mean exactly? How do you work? How does a relationship between master and slave play out on a daily basis?
He has no rights as a slave.
Yes.
Yeah, never.
And you tell that slave what to do. You have basically almost a godlike authority over that individual. Whereas with a servant, some sort of an exchange is being made, right? And in fact, you might actually it actually may be integrative, right? I need a clean house, I need money. And so there is kind of a joint power, and at the end of the integration, we all have more.
Kind of like living nurses.
A live-in nurse?
A living nurse.
I don't know what.
The elderly need somebody to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
That person needs the money.
Yeah.
So they will bathe them, feed them, clean them. Kind of gross half the time, but
Because it's like her desire is to make money. The true desire. The person's true desire is to actually get taken care of and do stuff that he won't be able to do now. So you kind of come together. It's a win-win situation for both of them, but not the best outcome. But you're getting your desires met, so.
I think overall, I don't know, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like, and when she talked about they both have, I don't know what you had mentioned, obedience and liberty to both be had. It's because they have the liberty to be obedient, and that's where the liberty comes in play, because they can leave or they can just not obey if they wanted to.
And it's not obedience to a specific person, it's obedience to a need. That's a big difference. With a
Yes.
slave, you have obedience to a person. Okay?
Right.
With a servant, you have obedience to a shared need. Does that distinction make sense?
Yes, you're getting paid. You're obedient to the situation because you want to get paid.
Exactly. Again, a lot of our stuff is authority is not vested in a person. It's invested in a it is vested in a situation. Does that make sense? These are kind of recurring themes. That's why I told you I spent a lot of time in the first part of the book, and these things kind of start repeating, and then by the time you finish the book, it'll be drilled in there. Facts reduce power over, and personal convincing is power over. Interesting, isn't it? Let's talk a little bit about this. I love this. So, when you start talking about facts, okay, you think about somebody. How much time do I have? I'd like to tell the story. Okay, yeah, I have time. All right, facts. Okay, when I was in the Army, there were these two guys. They'd been in the Air Force, and the Air Force went through cuts. So these guys were kind of like laid off from the Air Force, so they joined the Army because we'd take anybody.
That's right.
And, yeah, I mean, it's sad, but it's true, right? And these two guys had been missile techs in the Air Force. They had no skills that were relevant to the Army, none. But they were both captains, and they were just trying to stay in for like the 4 years so they get their retirement. We used to call them Frick and Frack. Okay? And Frick and Frack managed their power by being Excel and SharePoint and PowerPoint like masters. And they knew all the facts, and they had so much power over everybody. Because anything you wanted done, an entire brigade had to go through Frick and Frack. You know, I mean, you'd have majors like begging these captains, "Hey, can you help me out?" And it was awful, right? And so, and I remember I got real mad. One of them, I shouldn't say his name, and you'd ask him for help and say, "Hey, where can I find, whatever?" And he'd look, he's like, "It's on the shared drive," and he'd just walk away. He wouldn't tell you where it was on the shared drive. It would be nested in like 20 folders in some place you'd never find it. And the shared drive was so big you couldn't even do the search function.
Flaunting his power.
Oh yes, he was very excited about his power, and I was very unexcited about it. And then on an exercise one time, I remember he had gone into my spreadsheet to delete all the formulas, and so I was doing personnel calculations and eggs, and I didn't know how to do any of it, and I was so mad. And so I sat there on a 12-hour exercise, sitting on there with my gas mask, and no I used to wear glasses, and I never got the glasses inserts for the gas mask, so I couldn't see a thing. Pressing my head up against a computer screen trying to figure out how to do Excel formulas, like 12 hours a day, and I figured it out, and you know what happened? I redesigned all my own formulas on my own databases and everything, and then I put everything in the share. I learned how to use a shared drive, and one time he said, "Hey, where did you put that document? I need it." I looked at it. I said, "It's on the shared drive." And so I complained to my boss, and my boss said, "Don't be a smart aleck with Captain on it."
You hurt his feelings.
Yeah, I did. So, but you see, I learned a variety of facts to reduce his power over me. Okay? I had the information, and therefore I now had power too, and reduced his power over. Now, in contrast to him, I told everyone I had like a PowerPoint presentation on how to do all the coding and everything, and so there's power with, which really made other people take away his power over too, which I loved. Right? Now, personal convincing. Mary Parker Follett, she talks a lot about, well, storytelling, right? Get people into your field of vision. But convincing is a form of power over too, because I'm convincing you to do something for me. Again, I want to stomp 3 times. When I say that for me, that is power over. That's very different than communicating we have a joint interest determined by a situation, because it's not for me. It's for both of us. Do you guys see the difference there? So a lot of integration is based on storytelling. But it's when you're convincing for me that you have a power over type relationship. And then of course she goes through quite a bit of how to achieve power over. I think most people that have ever been in a professional setting would understand how power over is achieved, or how it is achieved on you. Yeah. So we are stopping at, about page 106 or so. And she tears apart delegation and some other key concepts, which will be a lot of fun. And so I'm looking at the time, it's about 9 o'clock. I'm going to close off this lecture in just a second, and then we'll review our written assignment, all that stuff. But here's a question I have for you. Is there anything that's lingering? Does this make sense? Is there anything that's like, I don't know what that is, are you confused or not sure?
Are we learning the different parts of management, or what is this?
Yeah, so this falls under our theme of management. We have now shifted from strategy down into just straight management. So this is a key management philosophy.
So this book is to teach us the different ways of management, basically.
And we have several themes that are going to go across. So, but you see, the ethical dilemmas that Mary Parker Follett faces are very different than, well, ones that Michael Porter would deem as strategic. Except Mary Parker Follett says, wait a second, no. Ethics and integration, all that stuff, it's the same as strategy, managerial, and operations. So she kind of spans it all three a little
Or
bit.
in an ethical kind of point of view.
That's right. This is a very different way of understanding ethics, isn't it? Ethical universalism, actually.
So it's because she has more of a psychology background?
It's her psychology, sociology background, yeah. And then, of course, on top of this, she was just a gifted, wonderful person.
In a way, how not a lot of businesses work on.
Not a lot of businesses work on it, but at least from personal experience, I can tell you, I've tried some of these techniques in my professional life, and I've been very satisfied with the results. But it does take a while to, and it doesn't always work. I mean, I was at the office, and it had nothing to do with this person who didn't want to print, but it was actually somebody on the main campus who didn't want to print, or didn't want me to
You
print.
just have print problems.
I know, I am a printer.
All they have to do is hit print. How hard is that?
I'm a printer abuser. I was wasting taxpayer money, evidently. And so a certain professor, had an aneurysm. She was yelling and screaming at me and throwing a horrible tantrum and everything. And again, I try to approach it through the same kind of dispassion. Is this really good for students not to print? That was my question. And I was very abruptly informed that I'm so dispassionate that she wanted to vomit. So.
Wow. We pay a lot of money.
This person does have a PhD, by the way. I won't tell you who it is.
That's
She
okay.
doesn't teach down here, so.
Oh, so we won't find out.
But what's that?
We won't find out.
Yeah, that's a good thing for you. But you see, sometimes these things don't work. But the difference is,
Yeah, some
I'm a-
people are predisposed to just not get along, but
sure. But at the same time, because I am supposedly so dispassionate, one person maintained their professional bearing, and the other person was stuck having to admit that their behavior was inappropriate. So.
They just didn't want to do it.
Oh no, that was just me printing at the printer. Somebody didn't like that. It wasn't even me asking someone to print. I was just printing at the printer.